It doesn't have to be like, it should not be right up against the mesh. What I'm trying to avoid when I'm doing that is I'm trying to avoid Z interference. So Z interference is anytime you see a face flickering back and forth between its proper color and a reverse black face, and I'll usually do it kind of striped across that face. That's what's known as Z interference. If ever you've played a video game and you've seen like multiple materials interfering with each other, that's also referred to as Z interference. It's essentially anytime you've got meshes pressed right up against each other, it doesn't know how to light it, and so it'll just kind of flicker back and forth between the two. Right, so this is my bottle. And this one is my label. Okay, so the label is a separate object. Again, I'm going to assign a new material, a standard surface, and label or label? I swear. I do know how to. Okay. And then do preset. We have a paper. No. Let's just do skin. No, let's just do plastic. That's good for now. All right, I'm going to select my label and go to UV. Oh, let's turn off the Arnold rendering. So I'm going to go to UV editor to turn that on. And here you can see my UV is laid out. But it's just a stripe. It's because these UVs are based off of the original UVs of the bottle, which you can see are, let me turn off the screen there. There we go. It's based kind of off of a cylinder's UVs, but it's very mechanical. So they're very stretched out. These are not necessarily good UVs. However, they are laid out, so if we were to apply a texture onto the top of this, it would appear. It's just, it may not appear very well. So I'm going to select this guy. And I've got a couple of options for making UV sets. So the first one, this one in particular, since it's just like a little square on the side, I can get away with doing a planar map on this. So under UV, there's planar map, and I'm going to open it with options so you can see what the options are. So right now, it'll ask if you want to project from the x-axis, the y-axis, or the z-axis, or from the camera. And I'm just going to do from x-axis so you can see what it does when I hit apply. So what it's done is it has taken an X camera, so basically like a side-facing or forward-facing camera, however you want to imagine it, and it's just kind of flattened mapped an image of this object. Now it's used the whole bounding box of the object to determine that, and then it's placed that texture or that UV set in the box. Remember last week I said it all goes in the box? Well, for our UV set here, everything can go in this box. And we can have it actually fit the box quite nicely. But this may not be the best angle for us to utilize. If we turn on the image and the if we turn on the image, you can see that the UVs that it's making are kind of squashed. So any texture that we paint on there will be kind of squashed. So I'm going to, you can make adjustments while you're still in planar map mode. So I'm going to squash it a little bit. Doing it from the x-axis was pretty fortuitous. It worked out pretty well. If we look at it from different angles, there might be, there's some distortion at the corners. So when you're using planar map, look at the structure of what you're trying to build, or what you're trying to UV map, and try to determine, can this be projected from the top, from the side, or from the front, flatly? And that's when you use projection mapping. Projection mapping is really good at doing something face-on. It is not good at doing things at angles, hence why I've got some distortion on one side and even more on the other side, because I kind of did it from just one particular angle, where the angle of my label wasn't particularly good for that set. What I could do instead is I could position the camera to what I think is a good angle, and then I can use the camera projection, and when I hit apply there, as you can see, it distorts the UVs ever so slightly according to the angle of the camera. So that's your fourth option when it comes to planar mapping. Now I would recommend, when you use a planar map like this, I do still recommend at the end of it that we switch to, I'm switching to UVs, which is F12. I'm selecting my UV set, and I'm running it through Modify, Unfold. And it's actually it grew it out so that it's no longer fitting inside the box. But with a slight adjustment, you can see it has reduced the amount of distortion. There is some, because it's curving. You can see as if you follow one of those lines, it curves out and down, because it's trying to reduce the distortion by curving the UV set ever so slightly. Now let's assume I'm going to do a second label. It's going to go all the way around the outside. Zoom type. Oh wait, no, let's make this also the label map. Okay. If you have two objects that you want to have share the same UV set, like I want this to share the same UV set, you can either select both objects at the same time, or you can combine them. Combining them, absolutely, they'll have the same UV set, because they're essentially the same object node. But if you've got multiple objects all like playing a role within, you know, your group, or however you want to put it, if you just need a UV map or have UVs on the two separate objects, you can just select them both at the same time. Okay, so UV mapping this one, we can't use planar map. Because if we use planar map on this guy, so it's done the thing that we asked it to do. So it's planar mapped from the front, but you can see from the UVs here, it's circling around. It's actually duplicated the shape of our geometry from that particular angle and flattened it. So what do you think this texture looks like on the back end? Anyone give me a guess? Very good. It's the reverse of the front end. Because the UVs are superimposing on each other. Essentially, we have some that are facing forwards, and then we have some that are reversed. And they can't lay out flatly because it's one continuous shape. So this is where we have to have, this is where we have to have a seam. In that the previous label, where it was just like a square, the seams were the outer borders of the mesh itself. That's easy. Something like this, we gotta pick a spot where there's gonna be a break in the texture, and then break it so that it can be peeled apart, peeled and laid out flat. So I'm going to recommend something on the side. Oh, the other thing that happens is look at the UVs on the side of this thing. See how they weirdly stretch and then repeat in inverse? Essentially, these are the ones that are on the outside. They'll never lay out properly unless you peel this apart. So I'm going to pick one edge. Oh, right. You can also see which ones are facing forward and which ones are facing backwards. Actually, let's just do it right there. Okay, so, yeah, that one. So I've got that edge selected, and I'm going to do, well, I can just do cut, so, cut. And that will, see how that, it's really hard to see with the color of this thing. There, now you can see it. See how this line, it's got a white double thick line? That's the seam. It only appears when the UV editor is open. If we close or minimize the UV editor, it doesn't show us the UVs. But as long as the UV editor is open, it'll show us where the seams are. Now, once again, we could take the time to peel this apart and lay it out again and again. We don't have that kind of time. So instead, we're going to use UV cylindrical with options. I always do it with options because you don't get the controls for it unless you apply with options. I don't know why, but here we go. I'm going to press apply, and we get like a little cylinder that wraps around this thing. Now, because our object is cylindrical, it's optimized for this sort of placement. So I can just kind of move the cylinder back and forth, and I can, sorry, I donked it up. So what I did is I pressed this there's a little control in the bottom of the initial placement that's a T. If you press that T, you can move and rotate. And scale the UV set. And now we get into UV shells. So a UV shell is one complete UV set. And again, it's got to fit in the box. So when I select it in shell form, I can scale the whole thing as one piece. And then I can move and scale the label. Okay, so upside to having the label set up like this is I can now export this out to Photoshop and I can paint both my labels at the same time. The downside is that because they're sharing the space, they've got to share that, what's it called? They got to share the real estate. And I think I mentioned this last week, but I'm repeating it right now. The larger your UV set is in this square, the more bit depth the texture can have. And therefore, the more detailed the texture can be. So, the less things you have, the less UV sets that you have on a texture set like this, the bigger you can make those UV sets and the more detail you can have in that texture. Then invariably someone's going to be like, why do you just go to 4K textures? Yeah, you can go to 4K textures and blow out your computer's resources trying to paint that high. And plus, not everything needs a 4K texture. Some things are fine with a 2K or even a 1K texture. So you can't always brute force it, is what I'm trying to say. Sometimes a project, just needs a little bit of something, but with good UV mapping, you can clean that you can keep that kind of stuff clean. Okay, so I've got a UV set for these two objects. I'm going to combine them just to. Okay, so label. I have a UV set for it. Some other notes about UVs. You don't want the UVs to overlap. Overlapping is bad because if these two are overlapping, then anything I paint here is going to end up here or vice versa. Just whatever's on top. And actually it's probably going to just share whatever's there. So you don't want the UVs to overlap. There's always caveats. There's an unless you've got something that can be mirrored in the first place. So let's say your hands. Does anybody know the difference between, like, the physical details of your left hand versus your right hand? Would you know if a person had the exact same details on their left hand versus their right hand in your day-to-day, like, comings and goings? Like, if your dad came in, he was like, "Hey, son," would you notice that his left hand was the exact mirror of his right? So no obsessive compulsives in here. So in 3D, you can use that to your advantage. You can have the UVs for the right hand overlap those of the left hand, and they're just mirrored. That's all. And you can do that with lots of things. If you've got a big complex scene, there's no reason to UV map and individually texture 500 candelabras in a stately manner, interior. You just UV map and texture the one candelabra and then duplicate it a bunch of times. They'll all share the same texture maps and everything. So in a sense, that overlaps. But at the same time, if you've got a candelabra, the different tines of the candelabra. Does everybody know what a candelabra is?
Is this a candle holder with like?
Yeah, it's is it Waxword? The candle character from Beauty and the Beast.
Lumiere.
Oh yeah, he is a candelabra. So his left and right, you could have the UV set from the left side overlapped on the right side, unless there was a specific detail that was on the right side that you wanted to express. So, and even then, there's lots of ways to get around that. The other thing I'm going to recommend, and I was not following it myself just now, is give, actually this is especially for you younglings in your first steps with UV mapping, give yourselves a little bit of space from the edge here and from your different UV sets. Later on down the line, as you become texturing pros, you can start getting more danger close with your UVs and letting them like really press up against each other in a really complex jigsaw puzzle. But for this one, go ahead and give yourself the space in between the UVs that you need in order to get the job done. All right, enough chit chat. So I've got my UVs for the label. I'm going to go to Image, under the UV editor, Image, UV Snapshot. And it's going to ask me, where do you want this thing to go? Do I have a project for this? I don't. One sec. Oh wait, no, I did have a project. Why aren't you doing that? And save. And then you can choose what kind of image format you want, the size of the texture. Always go for a square texture. And you always want it to be at 1024 by 1024 or 2048 by 2048 or 4096 by 4096. Some multiple of the standard 1024 or 512 format. And apply. And you'll see at the bottom it'll say saved. Anderson's folder soda ball UV PNG. If I go and look in the folder, and I'm going to open it in Photoshop. okay, it's really hard to see, but it's there. If I zoom in, all the little black lines that are in there, those are my UVs. It'll look better if I give it a background. There we go. All right. So one of the first things I usually